Reading comes from Genesis chapter 32. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, this is Jacob we're talking about, his 2 maids and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. And the man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. My name is Chris, and I want to tell you a little bit about myself and about my life. When my mom was 14, she was sitting at the table with her brother, and her mom had just brought the food to the table because, see, my mom and dad had been separated for about a month. It's just my grandpa and my grandma at that time. And as my grandmother came back into the kitchen after hearing a noise, I heard her say, "Oh God, no, Frank." See, Grandpa had been living away from us, and he'd come in the door, and my mom saw just in time for him to take a shotgun and shoot my grandmother right in front of my uncle and my mother. They got up from the table and they started to run, but they looked back just in time to see their father lay down next to my grandmother and take his own life. Well, I guess such bad karma carries on in the family, almost like this haunting story that follows us along, because when I was 14, I went hunting with my best friend, and I watched him shoot his father in the face. I think it was an accident. I'm pretty sure that it was, but, well, we were hunting quail, and I guess he thought that his father was behind us, and when he heard a noise in the bushes and he shot at it, he thought it was a bird, but, well, as you might have guessed, it wasn't. And so his father came out of the bushes with pellets in his face. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was freaking out. And my best friend, John, he obviously was beside himself. But I couldn't believe it that his dad had the presence of mind and was able to get in the truck. He told us, "Come on, get in." And we went out of the field, and he even had stopped so that we could shut and lock the gate. And then he went back to his medical practice that he shared with my father. And my father took care of him and bandaged him up. And finally he came back in, and we kind of were able to joke about it. It was really weird and surreal. Kind of made me sick to my stomach and wondered if the world was really right. Well, my friend John and I kind of grew apart over the years. He changed. He became pretty bitter and pretty angry. In fact, it was a fist fight between the two of us that kind of ceremonially marked the end of our friendship. I heard a few years later that he had killed a man outside of a bar and went to prison. My mom called and told me about that. Well, my father was given to great depressions, and he would lock himself in his room for days on end, sometimes for weeks. And this kind of took a toll on me too, upon my emotional well-being, and so I was given to great bouts of anger too. My dad moved out, and still history continues repeating itself as my parents separated, just as my mom's parents had done. Luckily, there were no gruesome events like happened to my mother. My dad would every once in a while show up. See, he lost his medical practice because the alcohol, the prescription drugs that were so readily at his access, patience there and his practice got the best of him, or he got the best of them, I don't know which. And so he lost everything. And so I would continue to be quite angry. In fact, I would sometimes sit in my bedroom with a shotgun and I would cock it loud enough so that everybody would hear me, so that they would come in and they would check on me. And no, of course nobody ever came. I just sat there waiting, almost laughing at myself. I think that, I don't know who it was, maybe Nietzsche, I think it was, who said that somebody who contemplates suicide seriously can finally start to live life for real. I guess maybe he was right. Well, because I was able to feel such deep emotions, it should be no surprise that I became a poet. I was able to access those deep feelings, the anger, the sometimes joy, and I could bring that out. But also in bringing things out and thinking and philosophizing, it made it really difficult for me to believe in or have any type of connection to the God that my mother and her Southern Baptist church had introduced to me, because I grew up in West Texas, full of Baptists, full of conservative religion, and I just really struggled with it, so much to the point that I eventually said, I do not know this God that you speak of, and if this God even exists, I want nothing to do with him, because he's obviously done nothing for me. And so I walked away from faith. I even told myself eventually that God didn't exist. The funny thing was, it was really lonely. It was boring without God, or at least some idea of the divine. I felt something. I had a feeling that something was there, but every time I would try to approach God anew, I told myself, no, because if this God is real, this God is a jerk. And I should have nothing to do with him. So I stayed that way for about 10 years. Until I came to a point where, well, this atheism, agnosticism, whatever you want to call it, it just didn't suit me. And so I got down inside of myself. I got down to the depths of my existential soul, and I started to wrestle with God. I grabbed God by the neck, and I pulled God close, and I said, what is wrong with you? We were so close that our sweat and our tears were mixing together as we stayed down there and we fought. I felt like Jacob, and I think I kind of knew what he went through at that point, because I came out of that experience. I'm not saying that I know the God of the universe and that I understand all of the mysteries and that I can explain why all these bad things happen. But I came out of it feeling so much more deeply, so much more connected with this being that we call God, in a way that I could, well, almost take a sigh of relief that made the question marks just a little bit less agonizing. Now, I don't want to make it sound like everything is perfect. It's not. I went to the doctor a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to find out why I've been so tired recently. The doctor told me I had something that I can't even pronounce, some rare blood cancer. Told me I had less than a year to live. So I'm going to keep wrestling with God. I'm tempted to turn my back on that God and say, you do not exist, I want nothing to do with you. But I'm going to keep wrestling. I'm going to keep feeling. I'm going to keep crying. But I'm also going to keep laughing. Because step by step, I'm going to understand what it means to be human, what it means to contain a piece of the divine. Well, I didn't make that up. That's a true story, fortunately or unfortunately. Guy's name is Christian Wyman. He's a poet who's published numerous books on poetry, numerous essays that have been published in The Atlantic and The New Yorker, and all of those parts of his life are absolutely true. I think he's still alive today, but I don't know for how long. But he continues to wrestle with God just like somebody else that I just read about, Jacob. Jacob was, that guy, he was a trickster from day one. I mean, he was pulling every shenanigan you can think of. And he would often do it in the name of God, but he really never took the time until that wrestling match to get to know God. See, it's said that his name Jacob comes from a meaning that says, he who strikes the heel, or he who grabs the heel. Because when his twin Esau and he were born, folklore says that he grabbed his brother by the heel and tried to pull him back in so that Jacob could be the firstborn. Because of course the firstborn gets the blessing, right? You get the birthright. Well, Jacob, needless to say, wasn't able to hoist his brother back into his mother's womb, but he was able to take care of this little birthright thing and the blessing thing, and this just goes to show how tricky he was. See, one day his brother Esau, who was working out in the fields, because Esau was the one who did the manual labor, Jacob was the one who stayed home with Mom, and I guess that's probably the reason why Mom, Rebecca, liked him, and Dad, Isaac, liked Esau. But he was sitting there eating a bowl of soup when his brother Esau came back, and Esau said, "Give me some soup, I'm hungry." Jacob said, "No, get your own." And he said, "There is no more. You know there's no more. You give me some of yours. You're my brother, for Pete's sake." He said, "No. Fine. Give me your birthright." "I'm not going to give you my birthright. Are you out of your mind?" "No, give me your birthright. If you're so darn hungry, give me your birthright, and I'll give you some soup." And Esau said, "Okay, fine. Here. Let it be done. You have my birthright." And so he got his soup. But in that way, Jacob was able to con him out of his own birthright. And as if that's not enough, you fast forward to when Isaac is on his deathbed, and he's laying there, and he tells Esau, he says, "Hurry up, come in here, I haven't much longer. I need you to go out and get some animals so that we can sacrifice them, and I can give you my blessing before God." And so Esau left, and he ran out, and Rebecca had heard this, and so she runs to Jacob. She says, "Hurry up, go out and get a couple of goats and bring them back to me." And Jacob says, What am I doing that for?" He said, just listen to me, go do it." "No, why? Why am I going out there to get some goats?" He says, "Because I just overheard your dad telling your brother that he was going to give him his blessing, and you need to get that blessing. So I want you to go out and get those goats." So he comes back, and they slaughter them, and he says, "Wait a minute. Dad is blind, but he's not deaf. He's going to know that it's me by my voice, and he can touch me." See, Esau was really hairy. Jacob wasn't. He says, "He's going to touch me right away," and no. He says, "Silly boy, this is why we're going to take the sheepskins or the goatskins and put them on your arm. We're going to tie them on there." And so he did. And when he enters the room and Isaac is laying there, he says, "Who is this?" And he said, "It's your son Esau." And he says, "Well, you have the voice of Jacob, but you feel like Esau. Okay, you have my blessing, and all of your children will grow numerously, and your offspring will become a great nation, like the stars in the sky and the sands on the shores of the sea." And then he took his blessing, and he left the room, and then Esau comes in right away. And Esau says, "Okay, Father, here I am, give me your blessing." And he says, "Who are you?" "I'm your son Esau." He says, "Well, you're out of luck, Esau. I just gave away the blessing. So, good news, bad news. Good news, I lived to get my blessing. Bad news, you didn't get it. And that means you're going to be subservient to your brother for all the rest of your years. Have a nice life." And then Isaac died. Well, Jacob got his. His chicanery proved to be hereditary, because when he had, the 12 tribes of Israel, his 12 children of his, they proved to be a little bit, jokesters, kind of like he was. Not really jokesters, though, in this manner, because his niece, that was his daughter, Dinah, they had gone into Canaan, and the daughter was raped. And so the Canaanites went, and they said, the king there, he said, "Let's not get into a fight over this. Look, my son loves your daughter, and I know what he did. It's not right, it's not cool, but let's just intermarry our families and our nations, and everything will be okay." And Jacob says, actually it's his son who says, "Your sons aren't even circumcised. We're not going to intermarry with heathens that aren't even circumcised." And so the king there, he says, "Okay, fine, we'll do it. We'll have all of our men circumcised, and then we can go on with this." Jacob said, "Okay, fine." And Jacob was up for it. He was going to do it. Well, his sons, having a little bit of their father's blood, said, "Now's our chance." See, they've all been circumcised, and back then there was no anesthesia, so they were hurting a little bit. They couldn't do much to defend themselves when Jacob's sons went in and took them all out. And so there were no longer any males in this particular tribe in Canaan. And Jacob was like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? God, you're creating enemies for me, and I'm supposed to be doing this thing for my father Isaac and his father Abraham. I'm supposed to be going out into Canaan and establishing a nation, ruining that for me. But it really didn't get to him until finally Jacob was willing to get to know who God was by wrestling with God. He wrestled with this angel of God, and he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. Wow. This guy had a lot of calls, huh? Tell me, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Well, you could see him building up to it with all the things that he'd done in his life. But he got it. He got God's blessing. He got the blessing of the one whose name he had used so many times to pull off tricks. But he finally got that blessing. And because he wrestled with God and got to know who God really was, to the full extent that he could, it was so that at Bethel, when he went a couple years after this, and he had sent his family on, and he found a rock, and he laid down his head to rest. And he fell asleep, and he had this dream of this ladder, Jacob's ladder, and these angels ascending and descending on the ladder. And Jacob had this realization that God's presence was in that place. He says, I will call this Bethel, the house of God, because surely God has been in this place, and I didn't even know it. Friends, God is not an easy being, an easy concept, an easy thing to comprehend or understand. It's sometimes easier to just, instead of wanting to yell at God, which we do, and I say that's okay, by the way. God's big enough. That's part of wrestling. But when God kicks you off and you can't understand why God is doing what God is doing, get in there to the depths of your soul and wrestle with God. And do not let God go until you're blessed. Have the courage to grab onto God, whatever that means inside of you, and hold on. And say, you have done things to me that I don't think I deserve. There are so many things about this world that I do not understand. But grab onto that God and say, I will not let you go until you bless me. But when you do that, prepare to know God. Prepare to have a glimpse of the divine. Prepare to know yourselves even better. And prepare to be blessed beyond imagination. Let it be so. Amen.